Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. And thanks so much for spending your evening with us. Folks are still joining on both Facebook and Zoom, but I'm going to dive in a little bit. I'm John Rainwater, Executive Director of Peace Action, and I want to welcome you to this next and sadly final installment of our Meet the Candidates series. This is as we all know, historical, frankly challenging, and at times surreal political moment we're all going through together. So really want to thank you for being with us tonight. And thanks especially to our candidates. Dana Balter is here. Shri will be joining us shortly, and we'll introduce them in a moment. And as folks join, I want to orient people to some resources we're going to be sharing. This, of course, is a chance to meet the candidates, but the not so secret agenda is that we really want folks to plug in tonight and be part of our Peace Voter campaign. We're Peace Action, so there's going to be an action component tonight. And the secret to the action portion of the evening is the chat panel on your Zoom there, or comments on Facebook. So be sure to click and have chat open. Not so much to chit chat because we want to get the focus to be on the candidates, but that's where you, for example, you can ask a question of the candidates. And if you're joining on Facebook, you can do that in the comments as well. We'll try to get to as many questions as we have time for. The two candidates we're going to have with us tonight, again, Dana Balter, which is the 24th district in New York, and Shri Preston Kulkarni, he's in Texas's 22nd. And the reason we've invited them tonight is these are races that are very close and where your efforts can help tip the balance in those races. Significantly, those are two districts that have been held by pro-endless war conservatives who've scored an embarrassing 2% on the Peace Action scorecard. And Shri and Dana have waged really smart campaigns that have put these districts into play. And that's where you come in. If you like what you hear, we're going to be sending out links to volunteer and to donate. And both of these candidates, I'm sure, can use financial support, probably more than some of the highest profile Senate candidates where the money is raining in. And they're also going to need volunteers to do text banking and phone banking and all the other sorts of volunteer efforts. So we're going to be sending out links for that as well. And, so you're going to be able tonight to donate, tonight to volunteer, to sign up, tonight to even participate in social media. And that's what's going to put these candidates over the top. And we hope you're going to take action tonight as well. And I know that I'm starting to sound like this is some kind of NPR or Pacifica pledge night, but that's just part of it tonight. But I'll stop there. But we'd really like to have folks engage. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our National Campaigns Manager, Lily Dragnev, to introduce the candidates. Shri's going to be joining us in a second. But before I do, since this is the last Meet the Candidates Forum, and this series has been so great, I really want to thank Lily for her leadership in making this series happen, and in and in everything that she's doing with the Peace Voter work. This has been a fantastic season. The outcome, we're biting our nails, but we feel like Peace Action is doing the right work. Lily's led so much of that. So with that, thank you, Lily, and over to you.
Thank you, John. And more importantly, thank you to both of these wonderful candidates for joining us tonight. This is going to be a historic election, and we've got two truly amazing and strong candidates, and they've both actually spent their lives serving the public. So Shri, for instance, served as a foreign policy and defense advisor to New York Senators Kristen Gillibrand on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he learned how to navigate these issues of foreign policy on Capitol Hill. Later, he was a Foreign Service officer and spent 14 years overseas in Iraq, Russia, and Jerusalem, among other places. And he got to firsthand see the value of diplomacy. So he, in 2018, was troubled by seeing the strong political divisions here in the US and decided to run for Congress to change that. And also, just a little fun fact, Shree's family on his mother's side traces their descent back to Sam Houston, and so he's in that district. Dana, meanwhile, spent her years teaching at her alma mater, Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. She taught public policy and citizenship and highlighted the importance of civic education and participation in democracy, which is something particularly important to us at this moment. After the 2016 election, she took up community organizing in order to advance progressive policy for her neighbors in central and western New York. And in 2018, she too decided that she wanted to bring change from the inside and kicked off a historical congressional run that actually swung her district 16 points. As the granddaughter of Holocaust refugees, she's fighting to ensure that those seeking opportunity in the US are treated with dignity. And so welcome, Shree, welcome, Dana. Thank you both so much for joining us, and we are thrilled to have you two. Before we get into questions, which once again, John said, use the Q&A on Zoom in order to do that. Before we get to that, we're thrilled to have you both, and I'd like to give you the chance to speak a bit about your districts and your races. So, Shree. Oh, you are muted.
So, all right. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you so much for all your support. Sorry, I was just jumping off of another Zoom, jumping into this one. We've got 4.5 weeks left, but just for those who don't know me, my name is Shree Preston Kulkarni. I'm a former Foreign Service officer. I served overseas in Iraq, Israel, Russia, Taiwan, Jamaica, and I did countering Russian disinformation back in DC, as well as working on Veterans Affairs, Defense, and Foreign Policy for Senator Gillibrand. I resigned in 2017 because I didn't think that this government represented American values anymore, especially after the Charlottesville Nazi rally, and I was being asked overseas if this is what America stood for. Are there very fine people on both sides of this issue? And we saw that reiterated again this week on Tuesday from our president, saying that white nationalists should stand by on the election in November. So for me, it was about standing up for our values, and the most patriotic thing to do was to resign and come back home. So we're trying to run the most inclusive campaign ever in Texas history and in American history. We have the fastest growing district in the country, the largest district by population at over 935,000 people, but 1/4 of them are immigrants. And we were told, don't bother with immigrants because they don't vote. And the easiest way to lose an election is to talk to people who don't vote. And we said the easiest way to never get change is to keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So we reached out to every immigrant community. I speak 6 languages myself from my time overseas. We are now campaigning in 27 different languages, all the major immigrant communities of our district, which has never been done in Texas or American history, I believe. We got within 14,000 votes of our 5-term sitting Republican incumbent without any national support. We weren't even on the list of the top 100 races in the country in 2018, but we brought out 30,000 new immigrants who hadn't voted for president in 2016. And then in 2019, I went to Georgia and talked to folks with the New Georgia Project in Atlanta, came back here. We did a voter registration conference with 32 different organizations from every faith group and every ethnic group. And we registered 50,000 more voters on top of that, and our incumbent dropped out of the race. So now it's an open seat. We are ranked as the #3 most likely to flip red to blue in the entire country right now. Our polls have gone from -3 to even to now, as of this week, we are +3 in a district that Mitt Romney won by 25 points 8 years ago. We are up by 3, but we need to do more over the last 4.5 weeks. We were also, last quarter, we were the #2 in fundraising among all Democratic challengers in the country. As of last night, I think we broke the all-time record last quarter for that Tom DeLay had set when he was majority leader in this district. And this last night we broke that record again, more than doubling what he had done. So we're working around the clock here. We're pulling in people from every faith group, every background, doing whatever we can to actually stand up for our values. So we believe in a society that believes in science and evidence in their policy, whether it's climate change or the pandemic. We believe in a society where every community actually has a voice in their government and a seat at the table. And we believe in a society that bases its fundamental principles on democracy, on civil rights for everyone, on voting rights for everyone, and rule of law for everyone. And that message is resonating because we are getting it over the top. We just have 4 more weeks to go. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dana. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sri. Dana, I know you are also leading a grassroots heavy campaign and have been able to really shape that district. So love to hear about it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me, Sri. It's good to see you again. Thanks to everybody who's joining this call tonight. My name is Dana Balter. I am an educator and organizer running for Congress in New York's 24th District. This is Central and Western New York, the Syracuse area. And I'm running for office because I believe that everybody deserves a fair shot at success. I grew up with a younger brother who has cognitive disabilities, and some of my earliest memories in life are standing by his side and facing down neighborhood bullies, helping him learn the things that most of us take for granted as easy, things like how to tie his shoes and how to read a clock. And I learned a tremendous amount by watching my parents advocate for him year after year to make sure he had the opportunities he needed to thrive. What those early moments and those early experiences taught me is that every single person in our society deserves dignity and access and opportunity. And I want to serve in Washington because I want to ensure that those very simple but very important values are at the heart of every law and policy that we create. And that means working to ensure that everybody has access to affordable health care. It means working to rewrite the rules of our economy so that it works for everybody, not just a select few at the top. It means working to rid our political system of the influence of big money so that our representation responds to the needs of everyday folks, not just people who can write big checks. And in this moment in time, in a period in our history that's been defined by a lot of chaos and hatred and the kind of extreme views that Donald Trump and his ecosystem advocate. It is, I feel, a patriotic necessity to step up and fight back. And we have a lot of damage to repair. Donald Trump has been very successful at making us less safe. We are less safe because the COVID pandemic is still rampaging through our country because he refuses to take the very simple steps that would get it under control. We are less safe because he has squandered the opportunity to fortify and bolster an economy in crisis. We are less safe because he has spent 4 years hollowing out our diplomatic corps, surrounding himself with military advisors whose first instinct is to go to war, and satisfying his egotistical need for feeling powerful. He has distanced us from our allies. He has cozied up to our adversaries. And he is now making us less safe by undermining the very integrity of our free and fair elections. He has done everything in his power to try to kill our democracy. What makes me incredibly proud to be an American is that as a people, we have risen up and said no. we are not letting our democracy go. We believe in fairness. We believe in inclusivity. We believe in freedom. And it is up to us to demand that from our government. November 3rd is an opportunity for us to make a sharp turn from the direction that Donald Trump and his cronies have taken us by electing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to the White House, putting our country's leadership back in the hands of dedicated public servants who serve with integrity and intelligence and competence and compassion. And I am running to replace a man in Congress who has endorsed Donald Trump for 2020, telling us that our country is better off than it was 3 years ago. I could run down the litany of bad votes that John Katko has taken and the ways in which he's failed Central and Western New York, but I think it's all summed up pretty well in that one sentiment. He thinks that our country is better off than it was 3 years ago, and he's endorsing 4 more years of the chaos and pain that Donald Trump has wrought on this country. So it's time for him to go. He does not belong in office. And we have been working very hard for 3 years now to unseat him. When we started, he had won by 20 points in his first election, 21 points in his second election, and that was the same year that our district voted for Hillary Clinton. And when I started this process in the 2018 cycle, nobody believed that this seat was winnable, that he was beatable. But we built a massive grassroots movement across this district demanding change. We amassed over 1,900 volunteers. We broke all kinds of records for a congressional race in this district, and we moved the vote 16 points. And now the polling shows that we are in a dead heat. Our most recent poll has me up 2 points, but we are running like we are 10 points behind because we've got 33 days to go and we have to get every single vote out. I'm really thrilled to be here with you tonight. I'm looking forward to the conversation, but I want to echo John's call for you to pitch in and help. We need donations. We need volunteers. Every text you send, every call you make is another voter that we get to this election. And the fact of the matter is that we have the numbers. If we get our voters out, we win. So we have the power to do that. And we know the most effective way is for you to talk to your fellow voters and make sure that they engage. I hope you'll sign up. I know the links are in the chat. I hope you'll sign up to help us out. This is not only about getting good representation for our district, but it's about making sure that we do our part for the country. I believe that Shri and I are going to be serving in Congress in 2021 in a year of transformative change for this country. I cannot wait to get to work. I'm really honored to have your support, and I look forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dana. And along those lines, speaking of the transformation to come, we have a couple of questions about 2021 and priorities for the Democratic Party. So Marjorie asks if, because the House Democratic Caucus is a very broad tent, and as you're well aware in your own purple districts, you know, as far as foreign policy is concerned, what do you see as the most urgent policies that you'll be advocating for when you get sworn in under, assuming a Biden administration? What do you anticipate being the most serious difficulties in advancing those views? And along those lines, what ways can we as advocates help? So lots of questions there. Do we want to start with Shri? I see you've unmuted yourself, so jump to you.
Sorry. Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest things is pulling back the AUMF. We have an authorization for the use of military force that was created in the days after 9/11, and we have literally been using it for the last 19 years to promote war all around the world. And we do not need to be the world's policeman, but B, we do not need to be increasing war. In fact, just the opposite. Even our secretaries of defense have said that we need more diplomats. I was one of those diplomats. Unfortunately, this current administration is gutting our diplomatic corps. It's gutting the State Department. It's gutting every agency of our civil society that's been built up over the last several hundred years. And so I think we in Congress, we need to take back some of that power that has been ceded to the executive, not just by this administration, to be honest, but over the last several centuries, the executive has taken more and more power. And I think this is an opportunity, especially I optimistically believe that Joe Biden, with his long history in the legislative branch and the place that he is in his career and the way that he talks about the soul of America, because that's really what we're talking about. Our country's democracy is hanging on by a thread right now. And I've seen it happen in other countries. I've seen countries lose their democracy, lose their democratic institutions, because even though people think our institutions are much older and they're much deeper, institutions are just people. There's no democratic institution robot that's going to come down and save us. We have to fight for them. And that's what we're doing right now. And I believe that we in Congress should take back some of the responsibilities that were entrusted to us in the Constitution in Article 1, especially the power of war. I think in terms of our national security priorities, we need to focus on 21st century priorities. When I served overseas in Iraq, we had tanks that never rolled on our base. I was there for a year and a half. We have a president who's talking about increasing our nuclear arsenal right now, which has nothing to do with our national security priorities. I would say the top national security priority is actually cybersecurity, because we know we're being attacked both in the private sector, financially, but especially on our elections, our free and fair elections, the things that we would talk about overseas. I have a staff member whose parents are from Belarus, and they were saying recently, thank God we left Belarus when we came here. And I said, wait until November 3rd before you say that, because they are doing everything possible in Texas and across this country to try and undermine faith in our democratic institutions, faith in our free press, faith in free and fair elections. Because if you do that, then you become one of those societies that looks for a strong man. So that's really what we're fighting for right now. And so those are going to be some of the top priorities of mine in terms of national security going forward.
Great. Thanks so much, Dana.
So Shree's answer illustrates yet more of the similarities between our races, because everything that I was planning to say in response to this question, Shree just did. So first of all, let me endorse his answer. I'll add a little bit to it. I think, as I mentioned before, the diplomacy first piece is incredibly important. And I agree with the need for Congress to reassert itself. The AUMF is one place. Congress is the people's branch. That is the voice of the people. And we need to make sure that our foreign policy, which is about a lot more than just national security, right? And that's part of the conversation that we need to have. National security is one of the most important functions of government, but it's only one piece of foreign policy. And too often in this country, we use those terms interchangeably. So part of what we need to do in reasserting ourselves as a Congress is have a national conversation about what should our foreign policy look like? What are our goals around the world? And how do we see our role as the United States of America on the global stage and in the global community? We've got a lot of repair work to do after we get rid of Donald Trump. This is another place where I wholeheartedly agree with Shree. I am excited for Joe Biden to take office because he has relationships around the world and a trove of earned respect and knowledge from decades and decades of service. And I believe that he will be able to lead that repair work to reestablish our standing in the world, which is incredibly important. I think we have to we have to be working to stabilize what is unstable in our world. And all of the ways in which I mentioned Donald Trump had made us less safe are all forms of instability. And instability is where danger breeds. And we have to think about increasing stability in terms of dealing with security issues, in terms of dealing with the climate crisis, which is the largest cause of displacement right now, and it's only going to grow. We are also, because of the climate crisis, likely to soon be facing potential war over resources as a regular source of conflict in the world. We had a leading role in the fight against the climate crisis. That's what the Paris Accords were all about. And Donald Trump promptly withdrew us, right? I'm running against a guy who said, oh yeah, we got a raw deal in that climate accord, so it's a good thing we pulled out. It's nonsense. Cybersecurity that Sri mentioned, incredibly important, not only for our elections, but also for our financial security and our markets. All of these things matter. I do want to say that part of what I want to be part of what I want to see in that conversation about foreign policy is how, without starting unnecessary war, without getting involved in endless war, how we can show up in places around the world where people are being oppressed in ways that are meaningful and impactful and in keeping with American values. And I say this as the granddaughter of Holocaust refugees, because had the world not intervened, had the United States waited longer than we did to get involved in World War II, I would have lost even more of my family. I probably wouldn't be here. And that atrocity killed 12 million people, 6 million Jews, 12 million people exterminated because fascism was allowed to run rampant. And part of what I think is necessary is to recognize, as Sri pointed out, that what we are fighting back against in our own country right now is what he and so many other dedicated public servants have spent decades and decades helping other countries fight back against. We're stepping up to fight it at home. We have to be successful here so that we can reclaim our credibility in that fight worldwide.
There we go. Okay, muted. Technical difficulties, right? It's the Zoom world now. Thank you so much for those wonderful answers. And in terms of some of these endless wars that you both spoke about and policy changes, the Pentagon budget is sitting at $740 billion, and this pandemic has simultaneously put a huge strain on our economy. We did see a vote this year earlier in the NDAA to cut the budget by 10%, but it failed to pass. So how can we as activists help you and others who are going to be going into Congress make this a priority to reallocate funds from the Pentagon and other areas and send it to where it's desperately needed?
Dana,
Let's go with
on this one.
yeah, I was going to say Dana on this. Okay, go ahead, Sri.
Oh, all right. Well, I can go ahead. So I can tell you what I saw when I was working in Senator Gillibrand's office. There's some serious problems in our democratic system in that we have lobbyists and special interest groups who will come through all of the time. The people who have the most money to spend on this usually end up getting the most attention, and not just the attention of our representatives, but they end up being the ones who write legislation. And when we're talking about appropriations, most of the time when we're talking about our defense priorities, we're actually talking about our defense contract priorities. I mean, that you see it happen again and again, where a defense contractor spends a lot of time with a member, and lo and behold, that goes into the NDAA as a top priority for us for security. So we need to make sure that we're pushing forward. We have our activists actually talking to our members of Congress, making them understand what's important to the constituencies here. If we care about peace, if we care about a more democratic society, not just in the United States, but globally, if we care about global poverty, if we care about climate change, as Dana mentioned, which is a global challenge, all of these things, we need to raise them again and again and let our members of Congress know, hold our feet to the fire, make sure that we know that people in the community care about these issues just as much as those special interest groups. But the other thing that I would say, one of my top priorities, in fact, front on my homepage, is campaign finance reform. That is going to change everything. And the reason is this: it's not even the amount of money that gets spent in these campaigns, because to be honest, you could add up the presidential campaign all the way down to justice of the peace, and it wouldn't even equal a drop in the ocean of subsidies that go to the top 100 corporations in the United States every single year. What it is it's the time that's spent. We have to spend in our campaign at least 40 hours raising money every single week before we even start campaigning. So we end up working 80 hours a week, and all of that time is time that could be spent on these global challenges, on immigration, on climate change, on peace. Things that actually matter to our communities. But if we have to spend all of our time raising money, then of course the lobbyists and the special interest groups, they gain a foothold, and that's not democracy, that's plutocracy. I was talking to a friend who's an elected representative in another country. He said, I'm shocked at the fact that you all brag all the time about the money that you raise in your campaigns. And I asked him, what do you brag about in your country? And he said, how many people support us? which is it should be the answer in any democratic system, and it's what we deserve here. And so that's something that I'm going to be fighting for from day one, and I think Dana is too. We're going to fight to have publicly financed campaigns in this country, because that would change everything about our democracy.
I could not agree more. Campaign finance reform is something I've always agreed that we needed. Until I became a candidate, I did not understand how massive the problem really is. And it therefore has become my top legislative priority. So I will be fighting with Shri to get rid of the influence of money in politics. It is corrosive across all areas of policy. The question specifically was about defense spending. There is no question that money in politics is a huge problem for our defense priorities. So I'll be there side by side with Shri to tackle that. I think one of the things that I think about when I think about going to Congress and how to actually do these things, because we have, of course, lots of ideas and lots of things that we care about, and how are we actually going to see them through? How are we going to make these changes happen? One of the things I think about is what can be our first steps toward a big goal on any given problem, and what can we successfully build coalition around to make some progress and build some momentum, which will then help us take the next step. And so this is something I think a lot about in the area of defense, because this is a politically tricky policy area for a lot of reasons. And one thing I think we can all agree on, regardless of our political perspective, is that we need to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in our government and in our government spending. And the Pentagon budget is a place where we have a lot of that. I know the Republican Party's been telling us for years that it's Medicaid, but it's not. And what I think we can tackle first in defense spending is cracking down on waste, fraud, and abuse. And based on what I already know, before I get inside the system, there's a lot of money there, which can then be reinvested in some of these other priorities that we really care about, right? And we need to ensure that we are spending enough on defense to keep our country safe. And we need to make sure that the people who are stepping up to put themselves on the line to keep us safe are protected, and that we are giving them the best equipment and the best resources, all of the resources that they need to do their jobs well and safely. Nobody disputes that. There is fat in there that we can get rid of. And when we are facing so many massive challenges, this pandemic, the resulting economic crisis, an education system that is woefully under-resourced, the investments we need to make in infrastructure all across this country to address public problems and create great jobs. All of that requires funding. And I want to ensure that public dollars are being spent wisely and with integrity. And I think that that's a place where we can start, where we can build that bipartisan coalition, and start the process of refining how we fund our priorities.
Thanks so much. Dana, you had spoken a bit about building coalitions, and so we have a question here from Sally Jones, who's actually out in New York, and she wonders how you can best communicate your concerns about democracy and foreign policy to the voters in your districts. So what messages have you found resonate more when you're working to build those coalitions in both of your districts?
It's a great question, thank you. I find what works is to listen first. And the platform that I've built here, the platform I'm running on, the things that I talk about, I think that they are all incredibly important. I have, they are all rooted in the values that I outlined when I first spoke tonight. They are things that I think are good policy that are going to move our society forward. But they are also a reflection of what I hear from the people who live in this district. I didn't sit in an office somewhere and make up this list of priorities and then put it on the district, right? I went out and I talked to people, and I sat in living rooms and church basements and libraries and said, what matters to you? What are you worried about? What's the greatest challenge you face? What do you want from your government? And there are lots of themes that recur, and I hear them from people all across the political spectrum. The number 1 and 2 issues that people talk about are healthcare and economic opportunity, hands down. That is what concerns people the most. And in this time of the COVID crisis, that has only escalated. But one of the other things that I hear from people all across the district is a concern about feeling safe, about keeping our country safe, and about treating our military personnel well, not sending them off to endless wars, keeping them safe. And then when they are in harm's way, making sure that we do everything possible to bring them home safely and support them once they are back here, with the medical care, with the economic opportunity, with all of the things that they need to be successful, to make sure that we fulfill that debt and obligation. I have found that the approach to this conversation that resonates the most is talking about the change that has happened under Donald Trump. We've long had problems, as Shri mentioned, that ceding of power to the executive has been going on for a long time. Those things aren't new, but the level of instability and insecurity that we are experiencing under Donald Trump is something altogether different. And when I talk to Republicans and independents and conservative-minded people, and we talk about what it felt like to see Donald Trump at that press conference in Helsinki with Putin, and what it felt like when we learned that Russia put bounties on the heads of our service members, and it's more than 3 months later and Donald Trump still has done nothing about it. When we hear that he calls wounded and fallen service members suckers and losers, that he has no sense of service to others, and that he denigrates the entire national security institution, right? That he doesn't trust our own intelligence agencies, that he undermines all of it. That is something that is problematic for all the folks who live here. And it is a way in which we can talk about these issues that connect us. And I think that's a place where we can build from.
So again, as usual, I would echo almost everything that that Dana said. I mean, the things that she's talking about in terms of the way that that Trump talks about people who've served. You know, in my family, my uncle did 2 tours in Vietnam. My grandfather, all of his brothers, all of my grandmother's brothers served in World War II, and 2 of my great uncles died. And we've served all the way back in our country, back to the American Revolution. And to hear someone denigrate service members like that, I think that, I mean, that's an insult to all of us. And when I talk to veterans, I talk about that. The attacks on our foreign service officers, our intelligence, people who risk their lives overseas. Anyone who ever talked about Benghazi, these are our own foreign service officers who are risking their lives and cozying up to Putin and saying that he believes the president of Russia over our own intelligence, or thanking him for kicking our diplomats out of the country, or offering our own ambassador to be interrogated by Putin in Moscow. These are all real things that have happened, and they hit me at a very personal level. But I will say, in our district, there's something very unique about our district in the fact that out of the 935,000 people that live here, almost 270,000 of them are immigrants. And so we have people from all over the world here. That's why we campaign in 27 languages. And it's a unique advantage, I think, in terms of foreign policy, because foreign policy for a lot of our communities doesn't feel like foreign policy. It feels like back home, and they talk to us constantly about the situation back home. And so when we're talking about human rights issues, when we're talking about global poverty, when we're talking about trade and climate change, these are very visceral to these different communities. And I think that's an advantage that we have here, because we have those diaspora connections, those kind of relationships that we can use. But specifically about your question, you know, how do we build consensus around these issues and I think in a very polarized situation? I also take my cues from my experience as a foreign service officer, working in places that were disputed territories, you know, whether it was Taiwan and the mainland, working on Ukraine, Jerusalem, or especially Iraq. I was serving in Kirkuk, where we had Shia, Sunni, we had Arabs and Kurds killing each other, we had Christians and Turkoman, and I had to sit down at the table with people who literally killed each other's family members, or some of whom had paid to try and kill me, and still try to bring people to the table. And I always say, if I could sit across the table from someone who wanted to kill me in Iraq, I can sit across the table from a Republican and work on an immigration bill or a healthcare bill. But you know, that kind of work of diplomacy, of trying to build coalitions, I think is extremely important in the polarized environment we have right now. And just to give you an example, after the 2016 election, when things were so divided and I couldn't quite understand what had happened in my country. Did half of my country actually not want people who look like me in the country? I reached out to a Republican colleague. He's a full bird colonel in the Army, and we started a group called Breaking Bread. We would sit down for a meal once a week, and we wouldn't debate issues, because even if you do it civilly, you're still trying to score points on the other side. What we would do is we would talk about concerns that we have, because you can argue with someone's position. You can't really argue with their feelings, what they're concerned with. It's very much like a marriage counseling exercise, where one person would talk about a concern they have, and instead of responding, somebody else would have to restate their concern in different words, which sounds very easy to do, and it's very difficult to do, because you almost always give a caricature of how that other person sees things. And I saw this in Israel, Palestine. I see it here with Republicans and Democrats. And then you ask the first person, did that second person actually understand how you feel? And they'd almost always say, well, not exactly. And they'll restate it a little bit, and the second person will restate it. And after 2 or 3 rounds of this, finally, the first person would say, you get me. You see where I'm coming from. You're in my shoes. And then you would throw it open to the entire group to see if there was a way to address the first person's concerns without violating the second person's values. And even if you don't come to an answer, you end up reframing the question as a challenge for the entire group rather than an adversarial conflict. And what it does is it shows you that you peel back the layers, and there's actually core values underneath that we share. Everybody I talk to, regardless of their place on the political spectrum, they care about their family. They care about the health of their family, the education of their children. They care about security for their family. They care about pride in their community, their family, and their country. And so if you can understand those core values, I think you can bring people together across the aisle to actually make progress on some of these issues, even if they seem divisive at the beginning. And my plan is to start breaking bread actually in the Capitol with my Republican colleagues when I get to Congress in January.
Thank you so much. Yes, and on that inspiring note, we are toward the end of our time, but I just want to give a few seconds to each of you for closing words, and I'm going to work in one last brief question about which committees you'd like to serve on come January of next year. So, Dana?
Great. Well, I will say again, thank you for having me, and thank you for all of your support. I am going to ask for 3 committee assignments, education and labor, because I believe that is where I bring the most personal expertise and I can contribute the most to formation of policy. It's also the committee where a lot of things that have a huge impact on our day-to-day well-being are discussed and worked on. I am going to ask to serve on transportation and infrastructure and agriculture, because I believe that both of those things are incredibly important to revitalizing my district. And I want to make sure that the people that I represent in Congress have a seat at the table when the agenda is being set and when policy is being initiated, created. I would just say to everybody who is on this call, again, please do what you can, pitch in, share the links that are in the chat with other people that you know, other people in your networks who are looking for a race to get involved in. This race is the definition of a toss-up. It is going to come down to the wire, and everything we do in these next 33 days will make the difference of whether or not we win. So I'm asking for your time and your support. And what I promise you is that I and my incredible team are working every hour that we can with every ounce of energy that we have to flip this seat, not only to get good representation for Central and Western New York, but to do our part for the country, to get the country back on track. And I take very seriously what the obligations of this job are. And I know a lot of you on this call are not in my district, and so you won't be directly represented by me. But as a member of the House, I will be working for you. I will be part of the federal government that is there to respond to your needs and to help create and shape the society that you want to live in. And I take that responsibility incredibly seriously. So when I ask for your help and your support, I do it with the understanding that if I am hired for this job, this incredible honor of serving in Congress, I will be working for you. And I am incredibly grateful for your engagement and your participation, your support in all of the forms that it comes in, because that is what makes it possible to do what I'm doing. And I know there were a number of questions about how can we as advocates help advance this agenda. Winning on November 3rd isn't the goal, it's step one. The hard work comes after that. And continuing these conversations, staying connected, being engaged is how we are actually going to move the ball forward and make change. So I am looking forward to working with you, not only to win the seat in November, but to make sure that once I am in Congress, we are working on creating a society that is advancing the cause of peace and prosperity and security for all of us. Thank you.
All right, so just to answer the first question, I think I may be serving on transportation and infrastructure with Dana then, because I also believe investing in infrastructure, it's something that's bipartisan. I think we can agree across the aisle. In Texas in particular, you know, we just got approval for the Central Texas Railway. It's unconscionable to me that we don't have the same kind of high-speed rail that they have in Europe, that they have in China, even that they have in Iran right now. And if we want to get to a renewable economy, this is something that people have asked about. How can Texas, which is the oil and gas capital of the country, actually transition to a renewable economy, you have to make those investments in infrastructure now. We're actually the leader in not only in oil and gas, we're also the leader in wind. We should be the leader in solar here in Texas, but you have to put those investments in right now to make sure that we have transportation. You have to invest in new technology. I'm talking to companies who are talking about supercooling air into a liquid form for storage. You have to connect the grids. There's an eastern and a western grid in the United States, and then a separate grid for Texas, believe it or not, that we have to connect to each other. And you can use some of that same technology to not only drill for oil and gas, but drill deeper for geothermal energy, which is renewable. And so there's lots that we can do with investments in infrastructure to help address these global problems. I also want to be on judiciary, just because of the environment that I grew up in. It was a very poor, crime-ridden area. Experienced a lot of things like gun violence personally, but I also experienced a broken criminal justice system. And having George Floyd buried in our district in Pearland just a couple months ago, it just hits home when I'm running against a cop, a sheriff who was fired as a police officer for obstructing other officers, destroying evidence, improper arrests. He's profiled Latinos over 95% of the random stops, and who's being sued right now for by the family of a teenager who was sexually assaulted over 100 times in his jail. So criminal justice reform is very personal to me, and I'd love to serve on the judiciary. And of course, foreign policy, that's kind of a gimme for me, but I will say it becomes hard in a district that has so many different constituencies here, because a lot of times they are at odds with each other. And I think my experience in diplomacy will actually help me to try and navigate some of those things and use those diaspora connections rather than taking them as just different constituencies which are trying to push an agenda that doesn't necessarily get us towards peace or advancing human rights. It's just blaming one side or the other. And I think that's a lot of what I had to deal with when I was working in the Senate. So my foreign policy experience hopefully will be of use in the Foreign Affairs Committee. And then the last thing that I would say is we know what the stakes of this election are. We know that there are millions of children across this country who are not able to get a proper education right now. We know that 1 in 6 small businesses have failed, and 50 million people have filed for unemployment this year. We know that there's 200,000 people dead, and an administration that doesn't care. Literally, they've said that it is what it is to all of these things. And the fact that our democratic institutions right now are on the ballot, that should scare all of us, but we should also be optimistic. And I say this because I see the energy across my state, Texas. I saw young people coming out in greater numbers before than I've ever seen before. I saw 60,000 people in the streets of Houston after we buried George Floyd. I saw 200 people in the streets of Vidor, Texas, the capital of the KKK. There's an energy here that I've never seen before. And if we're worried about the Supreme Court seat, I know that's on a lot of people's minds. There's nothing we can physically do to stop that except coming out in numbers so great they cannot be manipulated. And so I know Bloomberg is putting $100 million into Florida. Right now in Georgia, the polls are tied, which I could never believe before. In Arizona, it looks like Biden is up, but we have to win on election day. And the largest state in the country that counts all of its votes on election day is Texas. And if you think that Texas is a red state, look at the last 16 years here. Romney won our state by 16 points. 4 years later, Donald Trump only won our state by 8 points. And 2 years after that, Ted Cruz only won our state by 2.6 points. And our district has tracked that all the way along. Romney won our district by 25 points. Ted Cruz only won by 0.6 points 6 years later. So Texas is right on the verge right now. You can see it in the polling numbers. You can see it in the energy in the streets. You can see the enthusiasm that people have to come out and vote in record numbers like you've never seen before. Texas 22 is the largest district in the country. We have over 935,000 people, about 200,000 people larger than the average. We have to come out in such great numbers here in Texas and in all of these states on election day to make sure that this election cannot be manipulated. There can be no doubt on November 3rd who won this election. And if you care about these things, please come and help us volunteer. You can phone bank in any language you speak, up to 27 different languages. You can donate to make sure that we get out this message, because this message is resonating, but do whatever you can, because this is the election of our lifetimes and we cannot let it pass away. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. And I just want to say you're Completely right. And that's why we have these links. You all summed it up so beautifully. So go volunteer, go donate, make calls from wherever you are in the country in whatever language you can. And November 3rd is just the beginning. And so we have to stay connected, stay engaged, and Peace Action is honored to work with both of you through November and after. So thank you both so much for joining us. Once again, folks, please click on the links and volunteer and donate to these wonderful candidates. Thank you so much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
rest of your evening. Thanks again. Bye.
Good night.